At the beginning of January, Davis Square businesses opened their bills to find a major increase in their property taxes because of the 2014 reevaluation.
It was a surprise to me because actually my payment was double for this quarter anyway, which took me by surprise. And when I reached out to other business owners and property owners as well as the aldermen, I came to realize that that was what was happening in Davis Square.
Owner and manager of Johnny D's, Carla DeLellis, worries that the rise may discourage small businesses from succeeding in Somerville.
I can see the impact of such a high increase is independently owned businesses will very much struggle and or find that this is not a good community to exist in.
The city's chief tax assessor, Mark Levy, explains that the reevaluation process is not flawless.
What the assessors do under Mass General Law is mass appraisal. We're trying to put a value on a great number of properties, in this case 16,000 properties. We're trying to hit the target as many times as we can for as many taxpayers as we can. Invariably, there are going to be some folks who feel they're overvalued, and indeed the board will likely decide in their favor.
Levy agrees that the reevaluation process can be tough on both parties, but that the increases are not out of the ordinary.
Revaluation years are tough. They're tough on the assessors and they can be tough on taxpayers. It's not unusual to see major swings in value in a reval year. The assessors certainly are not here to drive businesses out of the city. We're certainly not here to put people out of their homes.
D Squared business owner and Davis Square resident Melissa Christie understands the double-edged sword effect of an area becoming more popular.
I'm all about things getting better and change. I love it. And the vibrancy and the energy is really fun. I understand that with that, though, can come, like property taxes going up and rents increasing dramatically. So I guess I'm sort of on both sides of the fence because I own a business here. But as living here, I think it's fantastic. So the great thing about this area is that people love small local businesses. And so they really come out and support that. And they don't want big boxes to come in here. So that's, again, the riding the fence, because if the rents are super high, small local businesses can't afford it.
We stand by our values, but we will review any and all abatement applications we receive, and we will consider any and all factors why particular property owners feel they may be overvalued.
If you're trying to take exactly what it is that made the area popular and now make it so that those exact types of businesses can no longer exist, what does that mean about the long term? That means that you're taking away our ability to exist, and therefore you're taking away the very thing about the area that made it popular or valuable to begin with.
Here in Davis Square, business owners are concerned about rising real estate taxes and the impact they might incur. We'll be keeping an eye out as this story unfolds. For Somerville Neighborhood News, I'm Colby Smallzell.
What an important story. It reminds us how critical it is for us to support our small and locally owned businesses in Somerville. Here's another reminder to the property owners that you can file for an abatement, which is a way to contest the value that the city's assessor's office has given your property. As of January 24th, about 100 property owners have done this. If you would like to do so, the forms for an abatement need to be filed by February 3rd.
Even though the city has explained to us that the tax rates went down, most of us are paying higher taxes because the value of our property has gone up. The city has held 2 meetings to try and explain the process.
On January 23rd, the city's chief assessor and his staff held a meeting at the West Somerville Neighborhood School in order to explain how real estate values are determined.
In essence, all we're doing is interpreting the market. It is basically buyers and sellers, tenants and landlords who shape the market. We simply come along and interpret the numbers we see. We've been hearing in the assessor's office a lot of second and even third-hand information on the sentiment out there, what people are feeling relative to valuation increases. We've heard things in the media. We've read some articles. But of the 16,000 properties that had to be valued this year, there were only 110 that went up 50% or more. That's a small number.
110 is a small number, but the numbers on many tax bills this year were significant. Somerville Neighborhood News randomly selected 10 residential properties to compare the 2012 and 2014 values. One went up by only 1%. But all the other properties rose in value by anywhere from 11 to 25%, like Alan Ball's house.
It went up 25%. I looked at all the other singles around my area, and they're all went up between 9.5 and, maybe 14.5%. I haven't touched anything on the house as far as improvements for 3-4 years.
My taxes went up $1,800 since 2010. And I understand the assessment, and all the houses are worth that. I'm not going to argue with you, And in 2010, I put in the check to get an abatement of check. And then once I check, the property's worth that. I understand that part. My property's worth that much money now, but I'm not making the money that these investors and the people are turning into condos. So the long-time people from Somerville, I don't know, that's who the ones that are getting hurt, and I know my kids can't buy a house around here. They're out of reach for us,
I'm up to almost $9,000 a year, and I get good rent. However, that rent will have to now go up if my taxes go up. I have a full-time job at one of the local colleges. It's not Tufts, but it's another college, and I make a good salary, but if the taxes keep going up, I will have to possibly sell, and that makes me really upset because I don't want to leave my home.
I know not everybody's happy, as I wouldn't be either if I get a 50%, 75%, even 100% increase. But I'm going to ask you to keep things in perspective. For most taxpayers, it's been 7 years since there's been a major adjustment in values. That is a long, long time. I know there's a reaction now, but remember that for 7 years, things have been pretty flat.
Median household income has also been flat for decades. And since 2007, the incomes of all but the super rich have actually declined.
I think what underlies a lot of these concerns is the ongoing gentrification of the city. And I understand that there are meetings set up to discuss that specifically, but I think that's really what we're all getting at here, is that as folks like myself, young urban professionals, are moving in and moving into these condos that these developers are putting in, we're driving up the cost of living here for everybody. There are cities around the country who have taken steps to mitigate the impact on the community so that the cost of housing does not spiral out of control upwards and push the community out that has been there for a long time. So as I sit here in a room full of people who, grew up here, raised their families here, I don't feel right necessarily as I'm shopping for a home to settle into, being a part of that kind of a problem. So I guess my question to Somerville is, are there any plans to take steps to mitigate what is already happening and what is only going to continue to happen?
Perhaps the cold kept many residents away, but those who did show up had strong feelings about their higher tax bills, no matter what explanations were given. Reporting for Somerville Neighborhood News, I'm Jane Regan.
Next, we go to City Hall. Over 100 residents and small business owners crowded into the aldermanic chambers on February 4th. It was a public hearing on the rise in real estate valuations and taxes. Somerville News Director Jane Regan has the story.
Many residents, especially seniors, have been up in arms since they got their property tax bills. On February 4th, they gave the aldermen and the chief assessor a piece of their minds.
I thought it was a big mistake when I got my bill. I've always seen the taxes go up gradually, but not to the extent. It's $800 more than last year. I think it's very unfair. I was not given any notice, no warning about all of this happening. I'm on a fixed income, I'm widowed, I'd like to stay in Somerville, But I think common sense tells you you're going to drive the people out if this keeps up.
Edna Murphy was not the only one to criticize the city.
So maybe, in fact, we do need to raise more money, and maybe we need a plan for how we're going to do that. But suddenly springing it on people, on our businesses who are part of our community, on our neighbors, on ourselves, isn't a good recipe for how to run a city or our lives or a community.
Several speakers talked about how gains in property values are translating into real losses for the community.
We're talking a lot about taxes. I think what we should also be talking about is what kind of community do we want to live in? Do we want a community in which there is a rich network of relationships, in which there's diversity of age and income and race, and people look out for each other and people know each other, people know each other's names? Or do we want to live in a community in which there are a lot of high earners who work elsewhere, who don't participate in this community, who don't know each other, and who live here a few years and then move on? Do we want a community without children?
My grandmother, my grandparents, my parents, my kids, my cousins, every one of us lived here. And it breaks my heart that no one's here anymore.
Mayor Joseph Curtatone also showed up. He asked permission to speak and began by explaining that since 2007, the state has been continually reducing its aid to cities.
What the state does is push it down to cities and towns. And they say to you and say to us, you want those services? Go to your property taxpayers.
He also admitted that the assessors and City Hall had made mistakes by not communicating well with taxpayers.
On the communication side, we wholeheartedly agree. I hope you give me your input, and I know you will, on what is proposed communication framework moving forward. There may be even additional things we can do. I'd welcome and value your input on that as well. But we heard people loud and clear. We own that. We're not going to run away from that. Clearly, even though whatever we've done years past is not effective enough today, that's our responsibility. We will improve that.
The mayor promised the city would try to find additional exemptions and other ways to ease the tax burden. But, he added,
but it's important to remember this about exemptions, that an exemption does not drive down the tax burden. It shifts it from one group to another. It just shifts it to a different spectrum in the community.
Somerville is in crisis. The homes and apartments here are becoming too expensive for the people who live here. I'm here at Clarendon Hill Apartments in the first in a series of stories focusing on the housing issue. According to Zillow.com, an online real estate database, the median rent in Somerville is $2,100. That's up almost 17% since October 2011. There are programs for people who can't pay market rate for housing. There are rental subsidies available for those who qualify, sometimes called Section 8. And there are apartments at city, state, or federal housing developments for families or individuals like Mystic Apartments, St. Polycarp Village, and other locations around the city. Additionally, units are available for the elderly who qualify at places like Properzy Manor or Capon Court. These units are overseen by the Somerville Housing Authority.
Our role is to provide affordable housing, and it really is affordable housing. It's 30% of one's income. When your income goes up and your income goes down, your rent changes along with it. We have no vacancies. At any given moment, we might have one apartment, but it's already got 10 people on that waiting to move into that one apartment. So if you're very poor, you probably, if you're a Somerville resident and you're not an emergency, you will wait years and years, sometimes 5, 10 years before we could ever house you. Unfortunately, some of those people that are on that waiting list today may have to move long before we could ever contact them again.
At his inauguration, Mayor Joseph Curtatone promised to protect the people who live here.
We will protect those who have chosen Somerville and help shape Somerville. That starts with affordability. And affordability starts with housing. We will create
a new affordable housing program for working middle-class families. We will not leave the middle class behind.
I think what's happening in the city, which is, I think, is an interesting conversation to have, is what is affordable. And I interview enough people, I know enough people, I know a lot of young groups that are in Somerville, and they'll all tell you if they don't own and they're here and they're starting families, many of them are not going to stay here. So then I turn to the working people who are not eligible for any subsidies, and that is who I think we are squeezing out.
According to 2010 federal statistics, over half of the city's residents, at least 17,000 households, qualify for housing assistance. But there are only about 4,500 designated affordable units available. Not surprisingly, when the 29 new affordable housing rental units at the St. Polycarp development opened up, over 1,000 families applied. Right now, 12,500 households, totaling at least 29,000 individuals, can't get the housing assistance for which they qualify.
With the Green Line coming into Somerville, rents and real estate values are going up, and there's a lot of talk about gentrification. Somerville is not alone. On July 29th, the National Association of Black Journalists hosted a town hall meeting about development and displacement in Boston. Our reporters went to see what people were saying and to see what could be learned for Somerville.
And we want to welcome you tonight to Roxbury's historic...
On July 29th, the forum brought Bostonians and housing experts together for discussions at Hibernian Hall in Roxbury.
Gentrification is the movement of higher income, smaller households in places that have been economically distressed.
Tufts Professor James Jennings said the forum topics are not applicable to Boston only.
I think what the Green Line extension means to me and what I take out of today's forum is that residents have to be aware of how real estate is going to go up. Residents have to know exactly who's responsible for what level of decision making and how can they as residents impact decision making before it's made, in a sense.
Some, like Alderman Mark Niedergang, are getting involved.
Down here, there's going to be a subway station. Supposedly in 2019, but they keep on pushing the date back, so who knows when it will really be built. But I do believe it will be built within the next 10 years. So it'll be a subway stop right here, and of course that'll bring tons and tons of people into this neighborhood.
Niedergang represents an area less than 1 square mile near the future Lowell Street station.
Somerville is terribly underserved by public transportation, especially by subway lines. So this will now, the Green Line will create half a dozen new subway stops in Somerville through the heart of the city and give us the kind of public transportation that we deserve.
But the Green Line extension will also bring other changes to Somerville.
My concerns are that property around the Green Line stations will increase tremendously in value and people will be displaced. Rents will go up, housing prices will go up. Low and middle income people will find it much harder to stay here in Somerville.
A recent study determined that rents could go up as much as 67%. Since 2/3 of the cities are renters, the rent hike could have major impact.
What I love about this community is that it's a mixed income community. It's very diverse ethnically and it's got people who do all different kinds of jobs. And I'm concerned that if housing prices go up throughout the city, only professional people and wealthy people will be able to live here, and it will become a very, very different community.
In Somerville, the households earning the least live along the corridor of the future Green Line, where rents are currently the lowest, the blue and tan areas. In comparison, rents around the red and orange line stations, the red areas, are the highest in the city.
And this is Maxwell's Green, a new development of 200 units that was built about 5 years ago. Apartments are renting for extremely high prices for this area, but they're full, and so this is, you know, the change that are taking place is very upscale housing that most people who live in this area couldn't afford.
I mean, we're already seeing some of the garages here. There's one right across the street that's been taken down and condos are going up. And I'm sure housing prices will go up as well. My husband and I are interested in kind of making sure the zoning laws work to keep Somerville from getting even more dense than it already is.
Nobody wants to move into an apartment and say, you know what, I would really like the housing in this to go up in 4 years. That is not very cool, but at the same time, I'm really excited that there's going to be more transportation here.
A lot of people drive already, and in the wintertime, a lot of people don't want to take the subway. So I don't really think that there's too much of a really big need for it.
Gentrification and rising housing costs can be counteracted. Cities or developers can construct more affordable housing or take other measures. Eventually, it comes down to what local authorities and the residents demand of those building housing along the Green Line extension. Reporting for Somerville Neighborhood News, I'm Shu Qingzhao.
As great as an extension for the Green Line will be for Somerville and its environmental policies, it's too bad that the rents are being raised so high.
It is a dilemma.
Here's another story related to development. News director Jane Regan brings us a look at some of the residential buildings planned for the city.
Somerville is growing and changing. The one-bedroom units here at Assembly Square rent for $2,455 or even more. With 195 units, it's one of the biggest housing developments in the city, but it will soon be dwarfed by Block 6, according to city planner George Proakis.
In the springtime, Block 6 will break ground, which is a retail and residential building that's 250 feet high with 440 units. It's one of the largest buildings we've seen forthcoming, but it is not as big as the Partners building. But it is a big residential building and a big piece of continuing this block structure of the retail first floors in Assembly Square.
There are also plenty of other residential developments in store. 48 units for the old Sunoco site, 75 units next to the Stop and Shop on McGrath, 65 units on Washington Street, and over a dozen other medium to large-size developments on Beacon, Broadway, Lowell, Medford, Summer, and on Somerville Avenue. The growth is not haphazard, according to Proakis.
We did a comprehensive master plan in 2012 called Summer Vision that provides guidance on how we're going to grow and where we're going and what we're doing in the future. As individual projects come to Somerville, they typically go before our design review committee, our planning board, or our zoning board, and that board looks at it to try to make sure it's consistent with our community's goals, with where we want the community to be going, with how we want to grow. This is the zoning map that's in place now. Basically, it has a group of residential districts called RA and RB in areas where we're mainly preserving the character of the neighborhood that's there today. The areas that can grow a little bit more are the business districts like Davis Square, Union Square, and some of these areas zoned industrial. In the future, as we're working to update zoning to be consistent with the Summer Vision Comprehensive Plan, which calls for certain areas to continue to conserve and retain essentially as they are. The neighborhood residential districts are typical streets of single, 2, and 3 family houses through the city. Areas that we want to enhance to have upgrades and changes, but not radically change, like neighborhood squares, like Teal Square and Ball Square, which you can see as the little areas today, which are marked as NB, which is neighborhood business districts, which are designed to really support the local neighborhoods. And areas to enhance where significant, to transform where significant changes could occur.
What kinds of changes? So far, a lot of development has been residential.
The big piece of what Summer Vision calls for is for 30,000 new jobs and creating commercial development. What we don't have in place right now in zoning is a way to encourage or even require commercial development to occur along with residential.
One big property that was slated for commercial development but now will likely become housing is the Stop and Shop parcel.
This is basically where it would be. Over here is the old Harris Park, where they moved down to, they moved the original Harris Park down to Cross Street East. So this would be part of the deal. And then all of this land here, basically up until the median's over here.
Alderman McLaughlin and neighbors had many concerns with the original proposal.
The response has been varied. I would say before it was 9-1 absolutely opposed. And then We've had a series of community meetings. I've held 4 community meetings within this past year. Over the last few months, it went from a 150-unit development to a 75-unit development. People still have concerns, or they had concerns, especially about traffic issues, air pollution issues, as we're right next to I-93.
Because of community pressure, the developers have since promised to lower the size of the buildings, to renovate and maintain the old Chucky Harris Park, to buy the general insulation building and give it to the city, and to sell rather than rent the 75 units.
It's come a long way, and I'm a person that I don't like saying no just for the sake of saying no. I like to have a good reason for supporting or not supporting something. I think I've done my best to try to get the neighbors' input. The one concern I still have with this site is the fact that it was promised for commercial development, and it maybe not conducive to a good commercial site. But it is concerning that the one site that we had dedicated to commercial is now being used for residential, and we see a lot of residential development without much commercial development.
The Stop and Shop development is just one of many. This building behind me will be 8 stories high and have 100 units, mostly 1 and 2 bedrooms, with artist lofts on the first floor. Somerville is growing and changing. And as we've learned, the people who live here can and have helped determine the nature of that growth and change so far by going to meetings and public hearings and by being in touch with their aldermen. As the city becomes more and more attractive to investors, businesses, and potential homeowners, more growth and change are inevitable. Will Somerville retain its unique character? That's up to the people who live here. For Somerville Neighborhood News, I'm Jane Regan.
So Jane, you did a lot of research on that story. Why don't you tell us what you learned?
Well, I learned so much I couldn't fit it all into the story. One key factor to preserving the uniqueness of this city is going to be to make sure that there's enough affordable housing for the people who live here and who want to live here.
What do you mean by that?
Well, what I mean is that there is so much housing being built, as we can see right here, but not enough of it is going to be affordable. A recent report said that the city will need 9,000 new housing units by 2030, and that 35% of them need to be affordable. Unfortunately, Somerville law right now calls for developers to make between 12.5 and 15% affordable, and that's great, but it's just not going to be enough. Luckily, there's a new zoning ordinance being discussed, and hopefully they'll be able to bring the percentages up.
Jane Regan, thanks so much for joining us.